The ANC's National Working Committee has reaffirmed the National Executive Council's earlier decision that all members who have been charged with corruption or other serious crimes must step aside from leadership roles in the party or face suspension. The latest to do such is the party's Kwazulu-Natal Deputy Chairperson, Mabuyakhulu, who has stepped aside from his position with immediate effect. It remains unclear whether the party's Secretary-General, Magashule, has stepped aside as he is facing multiple charges of corruption. Others who are charged with serious crimes include Bongani Bongo, Msiza and Zandile Gumede. Party National Spokesperson Pule Mabe joins us now for more on this story. Pule, good to have you. Thanks for your time.
Good morning and morning to your viewers.
Any update on this story? So we're reporting Mabuyakhulu has stepped aside. Still question marks around the likes of Magashule. Any news? Has he stepped aside?
You'd recall that the National Executive Committee of the 26th to the 29th of March had agreed on a process that those facing charges of those who are criminally charged with corruption or facing other serious charges would have to step aside within a 30-day period. But what was also agreed upon was that within that 30-day period, the Secretary General's office, working together with provinces, will then begin a process of compiling a list of such cadres that could be impacted upon by that ANC decision. The understanding has always been that at the end of that 30-day period, will then have to be advised on the conditions or what the relevant cadres whose names shall have been compiled, what they would have done, or what are the kind of actions that are being undertaken in those specific provinces. So the National Working Committee met on the 3rd to receive such a report and, of course, reaffirmed once more the decision of that National Executive Committee. We will be having our NEC over this weekend to then understand how many of our cadres have voluntarily stepped aside. If there are those that have not voluntarily stepped aside, then NWC had already directed that the Secretariat should, by way of letters, advise those comrades that of the activation of Rule 25.70 of the ANC Constitution, which effectively talks to a summarily suspension of such cadres who would not have acted. There is also work that has been done by the team led by the Treasurer General to then deal with the terms of and conditions of what happened in the period that the cadres shall have voluntarily stepped aside. If they have not voluntarily stepped aside, what still happens, what still obtains during that period that they shall have been summarily suspended. If that includes them reporting to their relevant secretariat every month, as well as making sure that there is some form of review every 6 months, with an understanding that sometimes cases that are before our own courts, because it is not the ANC that really runs the courts, cases that are before the courts can take much longer than expected. So we also want to make sure that we do not disenfranchise relevant comrades from participating in the full life of the African National Congress going forward.
Okay, great. Pule, you still haven't answered my question, though. I was just asking, has he stepped aside? Have you heard anything? That's all I'm asking. No word from him yet, or have you heard from him as yet?
Well, what I have said is that we are going into the National Executive Committee this weekend. We will get a report of all of those comrades impacted upon by the decision, and the report will also reflect on what each one of those cadres would have done after they've been informed of this NEC decision. So I'm not at liberty to say this one or that one has stepped aside, because that will only become, we'll all become aware of that over the weekend. The expectation is that at the end of the 30-day period, all those comrades impacted upon by the ANC decision will have to do what the NEC shall have pronounced on.
Okay, so there's no maneuvering out of this one. I mean, it has been passed, and there's very little road left for those that are implicated in any way. Because once again, as you have emphasized and you've said, that the step-aside resolution is not targeting any specific individual, but it is there, it is in principle, and the bottom line is anybody who has charges against them or facing charges must step aside. And this is now decided. So there's no way of maneuvering out of this. Is that what I understand you saying?
Well, of course, I mean, that is an NEC decision. I mean, I can't reflect on any other decision except to come and articulate what is a decision of the National Executive Committee, once more reaffirmed by the National Working Committee. We did say that when we receive a report over this coming weekend, the report will indicate that so many of the comrades that are impacted upon by the ANC decision have done the following. Either they have written, they've asked for a lesser sentence, because there are different conditions. Some of these comrades are public representatives. They could be saying, oh, okay, I understand this, but couldn't I just be kept in my role just as a backbencher and not playing a more prominent role? So the ANC will effectively be dealing with each and every case according to its own merits. So there's not going to be a blanket approach. But as it really deals with the notion of step aside on those who are criminally charged of corruption or other serious crimes, there is an established decision of the National Executive Committee.
I'm reading an article, it's written by Feral Hafiji, it's in the Daily Maverick, basically saying that Secretary-General Ace Magashule, together with National Executive Committee NEC member Tony Yengeni, fought tooth and nail against the step-aside rule. What they're arguing is that many other NEC members, including President Cyril Ramaphosa, National Chairperson Gwede Mantashe, Treasurer-General Paul Mashatile, and other members of the NAC also had allegations of corruption and poor governance hanging over them. So why are they specifically being targeted and not the aforementioned? Any truth to this? Let's discuss this for a moment.
Well, I wouldn't even want to stoop to that level, because the decision, and as you rightfully said, the decision on step aside, or the principle of stepping aside, is not targeted on a certain individual leader or individual leaders of the African National Congress. This is what was agreed upon by all of us at the 54th National Conference, that the African National Congress ought to play a role of making sure that it begins to position itself as an organization that could be accepted by the entirety of society, be seen to be openly fighting corruption well within its own ranks, win back the trust of the people it leads, drive forward the program of renewal. This has never been targeted to any specific individuals. Of course, when we go into meetings of the African National Congress, we'll all express different views. But when we rise, what shall have been a consensus in the meeting or a majority view expressed shall be what we come out to express, not necessarily talking to what have been discussions and all of that, because it is when we start doing that, we start then undermining the collective will of making decisions in the African National Congress, because we do not go into meetings of the ANC and just regularize decisions. The fact that we could sit in a meeting of the National Working Committee from 2 o'clock in the afternoon up until 9:30 in the evening must tell you that we deliberate each and every matter and we pay attention on each and every issue that is on our agenda, so that when we rise, there is a consensus from amongst the rest of us on what we need to go out and communicate to the public.
Okay, so how many members across the country are affected by this step-aside rule?
Well, there is a list compiled by provinces. I wouldn't really know top of my head, but each and every province, through their own secretariat, working together with the SGO, will have compiled a list of all of those comrades that are impacted upon by the decision of the National Executive Committee. That list would again serve before the National Executive Committee. Those individual cadres would then be briefed by their relevant secretariat on what now needs to happen and what now kicks in terms of the decision of the NEC taken on the 26th to the 29th of March 2021.
So when does all of this take into effect? Because it was given 30 days, then we saw this release coming out from the NWC, as you have been speaking to. Then we know that there's a big meeting taking place this weekend. When is this deadline? When must they step aside?
It is possible that by the time we go into the NEC, we'll receive a report that then begins to advise us. Once all those relevant cadres have now been advised, that begins to tell us how many of these comrades have stepped aside and how many of them would have raised different forms of appeal and all of that in terms of the sanction that could have been imposed. Like I said, each and every case will be looked upon according to its own merits. We'll also be receiving and finalizing reports of the Integrity Commission at this meeting that we are going into. There is already a recommendation that the National Working Committee is taking into this NEC on the appeals body that will be dealing with the cases that are before the Integrity Commission. It could be that there is a ruling imposed on me by the Integrity Commission, which I'm not entirely satisfied with. An appeal body has been set up to then allow those comrades who might want to raise issues with IC or who might want to appeal decisions of the Integrity Commission to be able to do so. So that at the end of the day, when decisions of the ANC are ultimately implemented, they seek to bring everyone on board. I must also not hasten to clarify the point that stepping aside does not suggest that cadres are being unelected from their own positions. Cadres are elected from various conferences, either it's national conference, provincial conference, or at the regional conferences. So even as they step aside, should it happen that whatever issues or cases that they are dealing with get to be resolved while the term of office is still active and during that reviewal period, such cadres will be able to come back and perform their responsibilities as expected. So stepping aside does not mean stepping down.
Okay. So let me understand this correctly. So if they do not step aside, they will be suspended come this weekend. And there has been threats.
Correct.
Okay, let me just finish this. There have been threats of court action, of taking the step-aside rule to the courts. Have there been court papers served at all? Has this been spoken about? And what is the possibility? What happens if this now does go to court and members will not accept their suspension?
Well, of course, the African National Congress would have to deal with that at that point. Where we are now, we will receive reports when we go into the National Executive Committee this coming weekend in terms of what shall have transpired in the intervening period. Of course, there is already a directive coming out of the National Working Committee, and this is a directive effectively reaffirming or reinforcing what was said by the National Executive Committee, that should there be those cadres that would not have acted in accordance with the NEC decision of the 26th and the 29th, giving that kind of a 30-day period, even after they shall have been informed of the decision, then you activate 25.70, because individual cadres might come and say, no, I've not been informed. I mean, I saw some of the newspaper reports effectively suggesting that, which then means that that work of making sure that cadres impacted upon by the decision of the National Executive Committee have to be informed. That must be done, so that in whatever we do, no one comes back tomorrow and accuses ANC processes of either being unfair and all of that. Because I can tell you now that these ANC processes are not targeted at specific individuals. It has been quite unfair that newspaper reports would then emerge trying to accuse different ANC leaders of this and that. I mean, I saw another one with the Deputy Secretary General, which was quite unfair, because the Deputy Secretary General has not been indicted in any court of law. She's then expected to play a role together with the rest of the officials. What this seek to do is to then undermine the very unity of the African National Congress that all of us are expected to hold on to. Because when decisions of the ANC are taken, they are not taken to target or tarnish the image or reputation of certain individuals. They are taken in accordance with what we shall have said at the intervening conferences of the African National Congress, because it is important that how we position the ANC out in the public becomes a mirror reflection of what intervening conferences of the ANC shall have pronounced on.
All right, Pule, just before I let you go, we are in news headline time, so I need to wrap this up. But did the NWC discuss the case of Supra Mahumapelo, who has reportedly appealed the decision to suspend him? And I suppose the key question is he still a party, or is he a member of the party still?
Well, ordinarily, then, the National Working Committee would not be able to deal with reports of all provinces at once. I mean, we'll just deal with day-to-day issues of the African National Congress. We are going into the NEC. It will be at that NEC where we receive reports coming from provinces. And if the ANC National Executive Committee need to pronounce itself on decisions taken by provinces, it shall do so and effectively communicate its decision out to the public.
All right, we leave it there. Pule, thanks very much for your time. Pule Mabe, talking to us about the step-aside ruling and what has been said in terms of the step-aside and the ANC's National Working Committee reaffirming the NEC's earlier decision that all members who have been charged with corruption or other serious crimes must step aside from the party or face suspension.